reconvening this meeting. The first meeting was on the 24th of November, when Ms Choi was unable to attend that meeting due to health reasons. The committee decided on that occasion that the hearing would be postponed until today on the basis that Ms Choi provided medical evidence of her inability to attend on the 24th. That medical evidence has been supplied. So before we move on to the process of today's committee meeting, I would just like to ask everyone here at the meeting to announce themselves, please. So I'll start with myself, Maxine Anderson. I'm the chair of the committee.
Philip Maynard from Science, I'm a staff member.
Sim Schweinberg, Faculty of Business, staff member.
Aaron Young, student from the UTS Business School.
And Joanne Gray, I'm the university representative.
Thank you.
Kamal Jagat from GSU Executive Officer.
Thanks. And I just want to ask the committee members if there is any conflict of interest. That was also obviously the case at our first meeting. Just to remind the committee members, though, that this meeting is private and confidential and should not be discussed outside this room. And of course, we're aware that the meeting is being audio recorded, and we all have been given a copy of the papers, so thank you to Kamal for preparing those. So, as I said, the purpose of today's meeting was to hear the appeal by Ms Choi. She has sent in an email providing a reason as to why she cannot be here today due to hospitalisation of her father in Korea and her role as his carer. She has provided some evidence of his hospitalisation, but unfortunately that certificate is in Korean and has not been translated. So just wanted to note that for the record. So the first question that this committee has to determine is Ms Choi's application that the matter be postponed, whether that should be approved or not. So at this stage, I'd like to invite the university's representative, Associate Professor Joanne Gray, to give the university's views on Ms Choi's application for postponement.
Okay, thank you, Maxine. So I've got a number of matters to go through, so if you can just bear with me while I go through a range of reasons. The first one is, at the moment, Ms Choi, she remains enrolled in subjects that are continuing from spring 2016. She's been enabled to enrol in subjects now for autumn and spring 2017. There is no prospect of her being able to finish these subjects. Within the Faculty of Health, we would not be able to put her on a clinical placement due to the behaviour we have seen around the placement and also on her performance during the placement. It is clear to us, and our role as health professionals, that she will be unable to perform in a way that would maintain the safety of the public. And I think, for her sake, we have to make it clear to her that this can't continue. In fact, if we delay this hearing to March next year, she will, to all intents and purposes, come back into Australia thinking that she can continue her studies. And I think that's quite worrying for her, and I think for the university as well. So I think that we need to very quickly let her know that we will proceed with this hearing and that we need this to come to a conclusion. This has been going on for some period of time now, as you know, and in fact the university first, the DVC Education Institutes referred this matter to us in July 2015, and we put our first request through to the DVC Education students for Ms Choi to be discontinued in the nursing program in October 2015, and we're now in December 2016. So it's been a very long period of time, and during that time Ms Choi has frustrated our process on multiple occasions, and I think today is just further evidence of that. I'm concerned that the evidence she continues to provide to us isn't evidence that actually does cover what she's saying. So the evidence she's given us about her absence on the 24th of November is not a medical certificate from the Emergency Department of Royal Shore Hospital. There's no evidence that she was there, and we're very clear in what we asked her to do. The information she's provided about today does show, and if you look at the, I presume what we can see, we have no idea where this has come from, but if you look at the dates, there's nothing here that talks about the 15th of December. And in fact, if a father has cancer and is in hospital having care, it would appear that he's currently not in the hospital according to the dates that are in front of us. But we can't interpret that information from her, but we have no evidence that her father is in fact unwell. I know I sound like I'm being very suspicious, but you can, I'm sure, respect the fact that this has been a very long, protracted process for the faculty to be engaged in. The other matter is that In all this period of time, Ms Choi continues to pursue other matters that aren't relevant to the committee but continue to absorb her time. So during all of this time, she's been able to lodge a further application for an internal privacy review that has come to the faculty's attention just recently, within the last week. So her history of frustrating the UTS process goes back to some time, and she has had 3 extensions prior to, in terms of submitting her appeal for this hearing to be processed. It was initially meant to occur, or her appeal was due on the 23rd of September. She then got an extension until the 10th of October. She appealed again and got another one for another week. She appealed again and then got another one. So this has been fairly constant. One of the requests for extension was based on her requirement for the information she asked under the privacy review, under the KIPA Act. There were 7 kilos of documents available to her. The university offered to have those couried to her house. She was told that they were here for her to collect. She has still not collected that documentation, despite the considerable amount of work, as you can imagine, that was put together to get those papers and make them available to her. In terms of the procedural fairness, and I know that you were concerned about that at the last meeting, can I say that Ms Choi has had all the documents provided to her that she's asked for. She has previously participated successfully in another legal proceeding, and there are a number of matters she's involved with, on the phone from Korea with the use of an interpreter. So that is an avenue that's been open to her, and she has previously been able to avail herself of that. She has also, I believe, failed to comply with a directive that she produce a medical certificate from the Royal Shore Hospital Emergency Department. The documentation doesn't really state why she wasn't able to attend. The other matter that concerns me greatly is a professional practitioner certificate, which is item 2.6 in your new papers, indicating that she's suffering from severe stress due to this matter. Now, her doctor was able to say that that started on the 11th of November, and it will continue until the 13th of March, I think is the date, or the 11th of March. I am surprised that any doctor would be able to predict severe stress for another 4 months following an episode. And given the severe stress she purports to be under, I would think, therefore, we should try and proceed with this matter urgently, so that she at least would have a resolution as well. I would say that, given all of this, I would really urge the committee to consider that this hearing proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Gray, has anyone got any questions? I've just got one question that might be able to assist with the outpatient certificate that Ms Choi has provided, as 2.5. Would that be only available to people that had been to the hospital?
So this
or
is
open to the public, that outpatients?
Well, the outpatient prescription, it does say, when you look at on the label at the top of the page, admitted the 24th of November 2016. So she could have gone into the emergency department and had that and then been discharged from Hanadine Fort. So what we don't have is any indication from a medical practitioner of reasons of her presenting reasons of a discharge something, which you would be able to get from an emergency department. It would appear from her letter too, which I thought was rather troubling, that in that attachment, that she's saying that she was admitted to the North Shore Hospital, and she says CRN, which doesn't give us really evidence of that. And that ward that she was transferred to, the Acute Assessment Unit, that was the ward that she was on when she was considered to be unsatisfactory in her placement, which worries me, given the concerns we've had about her constant return back to the staff of the hospital and to request that they change their opinion.
Thank you. So if there are no further questions, for the university, we'll ask you, as Professor Gray, to leave, and this committee will make this committee to make a decision about whether or not to agree with the postponement. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So they're fairly detailed reasons the university has put.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming back into the room, Professor Gray. The committee has made a determination that the matter will proceed today in the absence of Ms Choi. We've taken into consideration that she was given notice of today's date, which has been adjourned from the 24th of November. We've taken into consideration, to the best of our ability, the evidence that she has provided for the reasons to postpone the hearing, but we have also considered the university's reasons as to why the matter should be determined today, and so we have decided not to allow the postponement application by the student, and we will proceed. So we'll now move into the second stage of this meeting's role is to, we have, as I said, the detailed paperwork, but to invite you as university's representative, if you have any further information, details that you would like to add to the application.
So this is the appeal?
Yes.
To address the appeal
yes,
itself, not
yes.
about the, yeah, so this is the
so
matter.
I made the decision that the matter will proceed, and that's under Rule 7.1.1.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have information. So are you happy for me to go through what I've got here? It's quite complex because of all the annexures, so I will refer to them as I go if you'd like me to.
Yes, I think that's
But,
very helpful.
because I've had to go through them all myself,
Yes.
and as you can see, it's quite messy.
And no, that will guide the committee, and then we'll have the
Yes.
opportunity to ask any questions or to ask clarification of any details.
I've got a second set of papers here because I'm referring to my old ones because I've already tagged all of those. I couldn't do it again.
Thank you.
Okay. So, firstly, what I'd like to point out to the committee is that many of the documents that I'll be referring to and which support the faculty's case or the university's correspondence to the provost are behind tab 2.2, which is actually under Ms Choi's appeal, and that's just because of the GSU didn't want to duplicate the information. So just to say a lot of that information, this is where you'll find it. So I'm going to go through a bit of a chronology of events, firstly, so that I can just bring us all up to that same understanding of what's occurred here. So the background to the first referral that the faculty made to the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Education and Students, and that referral was on the 19th of November 2015. So the faculty first became aware of concerns about Ms Choi when it received correspondence from the DVC Education and Students on July 31st, 2015. And in that correspondence, we were required to ask Ms Choi to undertake a fitness for placement assessment, and that's Annexure N under 2.2. And in that, there's a letter from Professor Alexander to us saying, this student has caused concern. We'd like to notify the faculty of those concerns, and we'd like her to undertake a fitness for placement. Prior to that, Ms Choi had successfully undertaken a one-week clinical placement without incident in autumn 2015, and we had no reason to be concerned about her at that stage, and in fact she wasn't of any concern to us until this letter first came to us in July last year. That's Annexure U, and in that one it does show the outcome of her clinical placement, which is a one-week observational placement only, and it says that she was satisfactory at that time. What happened then was a repeated process of Ms Choi frustrating our process or our attempts to be able to get her to undertake a fitness placement assessment. We require that a student who's been asked to undertake those assessments come and meet with us so we can talk about what's required, why we're asking them to do this, importance of making sure it's done in a timely manner, and she refused to attend any of those meetings. There were constant delays. We received multiple emails from Ms Choi, and in fact our submission, which you don't have in front of you, but our submission to the provost was 100 pages, and that was just in 4 months between her first coming to our attention in July and us referring her for discontinuation in November that year. So multiple emails asking her to engage with us and to move forward with this process. It really showed to us, I think, that trying to work with Ms Choi was going to become unworkable and was very concerning. There was a complete lack of insight on her behalf into inappropriate behaviour and the consequences of her not engaging in this process. She resisted the authority of the university. There was an inability or unwillingness to comply with direction, even after extensive support from the university. And she repeatedly questioned the DVC's authority to require her to undertake a fitness for placement. And a lot of her communication was incoherent and inappropriate. During that time, we received notification from the Nursing and Midwifery Council that there were conditions on her registration as a student. So every student who comes into the faculty who's undertaking a program of study that will lead to registration with AHPRA, which is our registration authority, go onto a register, student register. So any member of the public and anybody who's a registered nurse or a health professional, we're mandated to report to the student if we believe there are any concerns about their potential to cause harm to the public. A notification, an anonymous notification, was made to the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and we were made aware of that on the 16th of September 2015. And in that, the NMC said we were under no circumstances could we send Ms Choi on a clinical placement. So at that time, we had been through 2 months of trying to get her to do a fitness for placement, July through to September. We were then told that she's not to go out because of the NMC. And then we thought that there was... so we continued to try and get her to do a fitness for placements, thinking we need to have this done so that, you know, when things are clear, we might be able to place her. We could not progress with her because she just wouldn't be able to, wasn't able to follow any of our directives. So we then referred this matter to the Provost on the 19th of November, and that I don't know if that referral was in your papers, but I have got a copy of that. So the Provost then considered this matter, and when he considered it, he wasn't satisfied that there was enough information to make a final decision regarding Ms Choi's enrolment. He felt that at this stage she hadn't had an opportunity to perform on placement, and that may be something that was important to give her the opportunity to do. But before that could happen, he did require that she had a fitness for placement. So that matter was referred back to the faculty on the 28th of January, and we again began the process of trying to ask Ms Choi and to get her to complete a fitness for placement. It didn't occur to the 4th of May 2016, so again took us a period of time to be able to get her to cooperate in that process. The report that you do have, an extra 0 in your papers here, from Jason Borowski, was not unqualified, and in it he indicated that Ms Choi failed to cooperate and complete all aspects of the assessment. She was sceptical of and questioned need to complete psychometric measures. She made excuses such as the questions were too long and that she was hungry. She'd been encouraged to focus on the assessments, but she tended to rush into the tasks without waiting for instruction. She was reluctant to complete all questions on the multi-axial inventory and wanted to stop after doing just 45 of the 175 questions, so the results were distorted. The psychologist then concluded that it was difficult to establish a clear profile or diagnostic picture of Ms Choi with any certainty. He was unable to determine any diagnosis of cognitive, emotional, behavioural dysfunction, if any were to exist. And therefore, all he could do was comment on her approach to the assessment as opposed to the results. And he therefore said that she attempted to fake good, so potential diagnosis of behavioural instability or dysfunction were inconclusive. But he did say she didn't have a cognitive impairment. Based on receipt of this report, and given there were such concerns, at that time I was the acting provost, so we're now in January this year, so I met with the acting provost, so that was Professor Leslie Hitchens. And we made a decision then for Ms Choi to be able to go on to a clinical placement, and that was an extra Y in the papers you have in front of you. And that she was then presented, that was after having the, that was later than, that would have been 20th of May, sorry. And then we decided that Ms Choi could go on a placement. So she then went on the clinical placement. And at that time, you'll see, and we've got the outcomes of the clinical placement. So what occurred then, that her behaviour on placement and her behaviour immediately following the clinical placement was so concerning that the provost then made the decision that Ms Choi was unsuited for professional experience and her enrolment be discontinued. After her placement, we again referred the matter to the provost, saying that it was our understanding that what we had seen on placement was of such concern that she was not able to continue in a nursing program, as there was no likelihood of her being able to be successful and to register as a nurse at the end. We take our responsibility very seriously, and our paramount duty, and in the faculty, our paramount duty is to ensure that in relation to professional practice, that the safety of the public and the students is paramount. Ms Choi's behaviour while on placement was assessed as behaviour that did not align with professional and behavioural attributes expected of a student. And further, which was the most concerning matter to all of us, there's no evidence of Ms Choi's current or future ability to improve professional and behavioural attributes, as she repeatedly failed to demonstrate insight, reflection and responsibility for her actions. And as a registered nurse, it's one of the key parts of your practice is you constantly reflect on what has occurred and think about how you could have changed things or what that outcome would have been achieved. And in fact, not only did Ms Choi not reflect, you will see that she completely wrote another story. So what she said was completely different to what was reported to us by the registered nursing staff, the clinical nurse educator and also her clinical facilitator. facilitator who were very reliable sources of information. She does state, Ms Choi, that she was asked to do things that were not part of her skill set, and in fact they were, and the subject outline indicates that. The other thing is that registered nurses do care for people when they are the most vulnerable. So we always have a duty of care to the patient, and that is our primary responsibility. And there are probably many roles where students who are unable to perform in placement may do a very good job in other professions. But when you think about a student who has a complexity of behaviour and a lack of insight and ability to reflect on this choice demonstrated to us repeatedly, when you think about that in the context of being a registered nurse and providing care to people at the most vulnerable, you can see that our decision could have been none other than to refer her through to the provost. Ms Choi failed to demonstrate any ability to reflect on the care she provided and to understand any concerns that were raised with her by the registered nurse and the clinical facilitator. Her interpretation of events, so that's an extra M in your papers, is entirely different to that of the registered nurse who was caring for the patient, the clinical facilitator, or the clinical nurse educator, all of whom actually observed the incidents occurring. Her recreation of key clinical events causes great concern as the implications for safer care of patients is profound. I think for anybody to recreate events around patient matters is highly concerning because it does go to their ability to be able to provide safe care for the patient. Furthermore, Ms Choi did not comply with the directive of the provost in his email to her on the 30th of August in Lecture R, as she went to Royal North Shore and visited the ward to ask the RNs to alter their version of events. The provost was required to direct Ms Choi on several occasions not to contact staff at North Shore Hospital. In the end, we had several conversations with the Director of Nursing, Ms Alison Zecken, and she was compelled to contact her staff in relation to this directive and to make them aware that they weren't to discuss this matter with Ms Choi. She was continued to go to the hospital. So in relation to her appeal, and there are a number of areas that she has appealed upon in terms of the grounds for appeal against discontinuation. The placement was suitable for first-year students. First-year students are able to attend that placement, and she states that it does say that, and other people have said it's not first-year placement. It is, that we have additional documentation that supports that. The level of supervision was highly appropriate. The Royal North Shore Hospital staff reports on her behaviour are entirely reliable. Ms Choi has recreated events that transpired while she was on placement. She contacted the hospital after failing the placement if this was inappropriate and in breach of the provost directive to her. The placement we provided to Ms Choi is a standard placement. The ward that she was on, the Acute Assessment Unit, which is Ward 7A, does take, in fact, student enrolled nurses as well as Year 1 student nurses. Nothing she was asked to do was outside of that expected of a Year 1 nursing student, and you can see that from the clinical assessment form and the subject outline. And in fact, many of the activities she describes in her own version of events are very, what we would describe as quite basic clinical skills. They're the sorts of things we'd expect a first-year student to do without there being any concern. So her first ground then, this is a summary on page 1 of her appeal. She says here, 1.2, decision on basis of failed placement. This was inserted as a determinant as to whether she was fit to engage. The provost's decision letter clearly states that he carefully reviewed the background to this matter as well as the documentation. The clinical placement was actually given to Ms Choi as an opportunity for her to demonstrate her ability to perform, to demonstrate that she's suitable to continue in the nursing program. So this wasn't inserted, as she states, as something that occurred afterwards. This is part of a process to determine whether she was fit for, able to continue her program. This is a standard clinical placement for first-year nursing students. There's, I don't know why, she seemed to think it wasn't, but in fact it is standard placement. She says that she was, UTS staff and Royal North Shore staff were coordinated to over-monitor her. We deny that this is the case. She reports that the provost's decision was an abuse of power, and I'd like to state that we have gone to great lengths to support Ms Choi. In fact, 9 months after the initial referral from the faculty and 13 months after the first time the DVC education students directed us to ask her to join FPA, during all that time we supported her and enabled her to continue in the program. She was supervised as appropriate in a standard placement. We were aware when Ms Choi went on placement, clearly, there were concerns about her behaviour. And we were worried about what might occur while she was on placement. So she was supervised by a clinical facilitator who had 2 other nursing students at the time. So she states in her papers that it's normally 1 to 10. In fact, it's normally 1 to 8. And we did have a second facilitator facilitating 8 students at North Shore Hospital at the time. But our ratio of placement of facilitator to students is dependent on a range of factors. And when Ms Choi attended placement, it wasn't during the standard block, it's what we call a make-up block. So we pull students who have missed placement for a range of reasons, and our ratios will often be different. But to be honest with the committee, we were very concerned about her safety on placement. So we, as we said, we had such a responsibility to the safety of the public. And given our knowledge of Ms Choi and her behaviour, we had to be very sure that we were monitoring her and the safety of the patients at all times. So the supervisor, a clinical facilitator, was present most of the time with her, and if not, she was supervised by registered nursing staff, one of whom said that they, at the end, and you'll see that's documented, that there was at no time she would leave Ms Choi alone with any of her patients. She was that concerned about her behaviour. So Ms Choi also says that there was a process that led to a decision about abuse of power, and we would say that we can't see why that would be the case. She does state that this was being referred to as a third year student. She was in fact doing a third year subject, and that might have been the confusion, but the placement we put her on was standard for first years. The clinical assessment form upon which she was assessed was the first year subject that she was enrolled in, so it was entirely appropriate. There was nothing in that CAF or in the clinical assessment form that indicated that she was being assessed at any other level. She states that she was being asked questions by the facilitator about something that was a third year knowledge, and that's not the case. I have no evidence of that whatsoever. I can't see that that occurred during her placement. So her recollection of incidents while on placement was completely contrary to reports of her Royal North Shore Hospital staff. When Kelly Eyre, the Director of Clinical Practice, sat with her on her last day of practice to talk about the reasons why she was unsatisfactory, Ms Choi was completely unable to understand why these matters were of concern. And when we raised the issue of her exposing a patient who was in the bathroom, she just couldn't understand that was a problem and then denied that it happened. The matter where she became very excited about a patient who was dying, and that she, in the end, Ms Choi's report to the committee in her appeal says that she had to drag the facilitator away, is completely at odds with what occurred. And I can't understand why, I don't know how she's reached that conclusion, but in fact it was Ms Choi who was very excited and overexcited about this death or this patient who was dying, and pulled the facilitator in, and the facilitator and the nurse educator both had to direct Ms Choi to come away from that situation. During an emergency response, there was a patient whose observations were within the, what we call, it's called between the flags, so that it's on an observation chart. If observations fall outside of the area or in the zone of being of concern, the first response would be to report that to a nurse, and Ms Choi didn't do that. So an emergency response was called for the patient, and during that crisis team intervention for this patient, Ms Choi constantly was distracting the registered nurse and asking multiple questions, completely inappropriate to what was going on around her. So had no ability to see this patient's in a crisis. There's a team here trying to work with this patient and try and bring them back into a reasonable state, and she was unable to see that. And that was a great concern, that she was not able to think about and reflect on what was occurring around her. I have more here. So there is quite a... Did you want me to keep going in terms of the... she's got many, many grounds, and I can keep going.
I note that the procedure set out a time limit on
Yes.
the
15
minutes. If the committee members would like to ask any questions of the university, because we have read the papers.
Yes. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things I have to ask. Firstly, the core of the students' appeal seems to be around this idea of what's a standard placement.
Yes.
So we need to understand placement. I've read the papers and I've read the clinical placement where each aspect says assessed against the first year standard and maybe fail. So I understand that part of the assessment, and there's no grounds for thinking that that she was assessed at a high level in first year. I need to understand, at that time of year, is that when a placement normally happens? What sort of length was this compared to a standard autumn semester sort of placement?
Yeah, okay. In that subject that she was enrolled in, ADHD 2, every student has to do 80 hours of placement, and she undertook 80 hours of placement. We place students during the subject if possible. We can't always offer a placement then because there simply aren't enough placements. So then we have other blocks, so we have placement blocks that are facilitated in the normal way, and we allocate students to those blocks of time. And the students know that at the beginning of the year, so they've got a clinical ladder that says these are the placement blocks that will be available for you in this subject.
Okay, so the date was a standard date?
Yes.
And the facilitators made available were the standard facilitators, were they?
Yes, they're the ones we've used all the time. Yes, yeah. So Anne was a clinical facilitator, was a known facilitator to us.
And that's what it was, a make-up placement, was it called?
Yeah, well, she had a make-up block,
But
it wasn't for her.
No,
just
it was those ones that fall outside.
Yes, yeah. And it's because, we're still waiting for her to get the fitness for placement and there are all the other delays that occurred. Yeah.
Yes.
Just within document 2.2, attachment 1, as page 3, as part of that table, which is in the field. Page 3. Just regarding the procedures at the bottom of that for the awarding of the fail, so students written, although students do fail for the clinical placement, they are not excluded from the nursing faculty, they're permitted to take the subject again. And just looking at then the interpretation of what happens if the appellants fail for clinical placement results in the decision to withdraw her enrolment from the faculty. She appealed the fail in writing. She appealed the fail result in writing at the meeting held by the Director of Clinical Practice. Would occur when she submitted her appeal did not eventuate prior to the Associate Dean's report being forwarded to the promise. Just wondering if you just comment on your interpretation of that.
So there are situations where if a student fails a placement, depending on the circumstances, they then fail the subject and they then will be able to give the opportunity to do the subject again.
Right.
In this situation, however, the demonstration of her behaviour during placement was of such concern that we felt that we had no choice but to recommend her to the DBC to be discontinued. So that is a process that overrides the
I have a question about 1.5 in document 2.2. So, allegation that the hospital staff were over-monitoring. Now you denied that, but then you went on to say that there was significant cause for concern and that the clinical facilitator and the registered nurse was very closely monitoring the student the entire time. Now, is it normal for the clinical facilitator to spend that much time focusing on someone?
Yeah. So the way it works with the students, because they can't, the registered nurse has the entire responsibility for the patient at all times. So a student is always supervised by a registered nurse at all times around placement, so that is entirely normal. The facilitator's role is to make sure the student is adequately placed during that day, so she will align with a registered nurse and say, the nurse has got these group of 3 or 4 patients, you'll be working with that nurse and that's what will occur during the day. So the facilitator may remain around and just observe the student in performance, then they will leave and they'll go and visit their other students. They will talk to the clinical nurse educator, they will do a range of other activities. But it wasn't that, for example, that the facilitator and the RN were on either side of Ms Troy every time, because we were aware that we had to give her the opportunity to demonstrate her ability to perform in that setting. So over-monitoring actually does us disservice because it doesn't allow us to see the student make their own clinical judgment. And so there's always this, what we call indirect supervision. So the supervision that is direct is when the student would be performing any skill or activity with the patient. But indirect is where there would be a registered nurse who'd know that they say to a student, can you go and please take these observations on this patient in bed 3 and come back and report to me. So they're the layers of supervision that occur. So I'm not sure that, I would say that there's no way this was over-supervised, though we were conscious of the fact that her behaviour was so unusual that there had to be sufficient supervision to ensure safety of the patients.
Just because a core point of what she put through in her papers was that the prospect of having a regular placement wouldn't involve any additional information being provided to the...
Well, no additional information was provided to the facilitators. Yeah.
Okay. So at what point in time was all the additional focus being put on her?
It wasn't any additional focus in my mind. It was the fact that
because you mentioned there was no concern for the behaviours.
Yeah.
So I guess if that was being looked for specifically, would that constitute like awareness like beyond what they would otherwise pick up through the course of a normal observation?
Okay. I think the incidents that have been referred to in her unsatisfactory practice placement are the normal sorts of things you'd expect a student nurse to be able to perform satisfactorily. So they didn't require a great deal of supervision to know that what she was doing was entirely unsafe and outside what is expected of a student nurse at that time. So the registered nurses were the ones that observed that behaviour on most part. It wasn't the clinical facilitator, because the registered nurse was with Ms Choi as she was performing care to the patients. I think it was of interest that it was the second week of the placement when these things start to unravel. In the first week, there were no indication that there were any concerns with what was going on. But by the second week, her standard of clinical care became of considerable concern. And as a registered nurse, and I know I would do exactly the same, that if I had a student with me and all of a sudden I was noticing things that were really concerning, I would just watch more closely. And I think she may have, that's maybe what she's referring to. But that registered nurse at the end of the day is a primary person responsible for the care of that patient. Yeah.
Okay, I have another question now. It's not in the appeal document exactly, but there's several references in the documents, and you've mentioned in your evidence that the student made contact with staff members, which sound like they were inappropriate and should have been known as such. And that's before the provost made a formal directive, and then the provost made a formal directive not to contact staff or the facilitators. And then she made contact after the provost made that direction. Is that correct?
Yes. So
could you give me a bit of detail and timeline on that, please?
Well, on the last day of her placement, she was debriefed around what had occurred by Kelly, our Director of Clinical Practice, and at the end of that, Kelly said to her that she was not under any circumstances to contact the staff on the ward, because we were aware that that may be a consequence of her receiving an unsatisfactory report. So she was told then that she wasn't to contact the staff. By that night, the clinical facilitator had already received contact from Ms Choi, even though she's been told that afternoon not to contact her. On the Monday, I think it was on the Monday, there was a phone call from the hospital saying she'd gone in to see the staff. She then received the directive and she went back again. And that's when the hospital contacted us and said she's continuing to come on the premises. She's gone to the switchboard to ask for the names of the registered nurses. She's gone onto the ward to speak to the clinical nurse educator, which she did. And then I think the next time, then she had the directive again, and I think the next time she went to the office of, I think it was the clinical educators unit wanting to speak to staff, and then she went to seek information I did give her. So that was entirely appropriate. But there was a feeling that there were many phone calls as well. One of the pieces of information we have from the hospital was that the EA to the Director of Nursing said there were constant phone calls.
Okay. Did these inappropriate contacts form part of the hospital's decision to discontinue her?
I'm just trying to reflect on when he made that.
I'm trying to work out exactly what were the grounds for discontinuation. We've got the appeal, which doesn't address that sort of side of the issue at all. So did the provost formally say? Yeah.
When I met with the provost, he would say that there were two key reasons why he received the discontinuation. One was a fit for placement, that he was unhappy with the outcome of that and felt that there was enough evidence of that to be of concern. And the other one was a demonstration of unsafe clinical practice during her placement. He said they were the two key reasons that he made this decision. I think that the continuation of her behaviour following it were probably a small part of his decision, but the bulk of his decision was based on the report from the clinical psychologist and from her demonstration of her behaviour during placement.
So that goes to the inherent requirements.
Yes. And again, to the inability, we feel, of her, of the possibility of her being able to complete the nursing course and become a registered nurse.
And is that at the same time that Ms Choi, or the statutory declaration, which is an extra G, was submitted? That was on the 2nd of August this year, so that Must have been after
This is after the placement, yes, yeah. So this is the one from the registered nurses.
Yes.
Yes, and that was their evidence about the concerns they raised when the student was on placement. So they're the ones I've referred to, for example, that blood pressure that she didn't. So there were a number of ones that the registered nurses outlined, and they're the ones they observed. So that wasn't the clinical facilitator.
I just had one question, still within the actual appeal document itself, so document 2.2, attachment 1, ground 4. So ground 4, item 22. It just refers to the decision to impose on the appellant 6 sessions of psychological treatments and requested fitness and placement assessment is normally only sought by the Faculty of Health in confidence. Just wondering whether you'd be able to say something on the process whereby the FPA was actually requested and whether or not that can come from outside the Faculty of Health as the actual appeal document seems to imply.
Sorry, so what point was
Sorry,
this?
it's document 2.2, attachment 1, ground 4, item 22.
Page 9.
Right.
Item 22.
Yeah, item 22.
Okay, so the 6 sessions of psychological treatments were outside of the faculty's directive. So this occurred. All these additional matters that are going on that are outside of this committee. But Professor Alexander requested those treatments as well as an FPA, which then the faculty instituted the FPA. But these 6 sessions were due to concerns that Professor Alexander had about the students' health.
Can I just ask a question, please, around the relationship between the Nursing and Midwifery Council? And so there was a notification made to the council of a concern. It was an anonymous one.
Yes.
And then what's the relationship between the council's authority with nursing students?
Okay, so the way it works is AHPRA is which is the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. They're the overarching national body. They delegate the responsibility for student matters and matters about professional behaviour to the Nursing and Midwifery, to the NMBA, Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia. And in New South Wales, the Nursing and Midwifery Council have been established to look at matters of misconduct. So every student is registered. We send details of all our students to AHPRA. We're required to under national law. And then if we, through the university report, there's a process we go through. It goes to the NMBA, they make a decision. Does it go to the Nursing and Midwifery Council, or do they then proceed with the hearing? So you can see initially they were very concerned due to this anonymous report. They said, don't put her out on placement until further advice, and we received that advice in January this year.
Further questions? Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
Great. We will be in contact with you after the committee has made a decision, and obviously we'll notify Ms Kelly our decision as well. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So thank you, Associate Professor Gray, for coming back in. Obviously, a written report will be provided to the faculty and, of course, to Ms Choi as well. But we thought that we would give you an oral decision, and the committee has considered the volume of written materials. We've had the opportunity to consider it in great detail, given that this is the second time that the meeting has convened to hear the appeal. We've also had the opportunity to seek clarity about some of the areas that we had some questions around, and to hear information from the university. So we have reached the decision that the appeal should be dismissed, and we've reached that for the following reasons. The first one was that the student was offered the opportunity to be assessed and to return to a clinical placement by the provost. So that gave the student the chance to show that she had the ability to fulfil the requirements of the subject and indeed the inherent requirements of the course itself. Secondly, we note the student's concerns around the fitness for placement assessment report that was undertaken. The committee feels that given that the practitioner that prepared that report didn't have the ability or the opportunity to prepare a full report because the student would not engage fully in what was expected in that assessment, that the student has then taken that report and given a selective view about that, hasn't fully interpreted the report, and indeed, as we indicated, the expert didn't have the opportunity to be able to prepare a full report, so that the concerns that Ms Choi has around the fitness of placement assessment, the committee didn't accept on the basis of the assessment. The third reason, and that the committee has accepted the university's information that the placement was at the first year level, that it was a first year subject, it was a fundamental subject in the Bachelor of Nursing, and that the tasks that were required of the student and that she was assessed against were the same tasks that would be given to and assessed against for any other first year student. So there was no discrimination against the student on that basis, that she was expected to be performing as a third year student. Fourthly, we accept that the hospital staff are independent, that there was no reason why they would give a subjective assessment of the student's ability on placement, particularly around her ability to show professional and behavioural conduct and to be reflective as a nursing practitioner should be, even at a student level. So we accept that the assessment of the hospital was an objective assessment. And then finally, based on the papers and the evidence that we have come to the conclusion that the student hasn't satisfied the inherent requirements that were made known to her at the time that she undertook this subject and throughout the placement, and therefore that she is not suitable for the course. So, thank you. Thank you. And we'll confirm any writing.
Yes,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mr. Gray. So I think that concludes our meeting. So thank you very much, Philip and Stephen and Aaron. Again, thank you, Aaron, as a student representative, for coming in your non-teaching time. And wish you all the best for the break, and to wish you both all the best for the end of the year. And thank you, Kamal, for all the detail, and Lucy had done as well.